Thank you so much for joining us this evening on this beautiful October evening. You can tell it's October because it was only 89 degrees outside today. Before we get started, if I could just alert everybody to our Books and Books newsletter. I realize this is September, but this will give you a rundown of all the wonderful events we have at Books and Books every night of the week. You can pick up a copy of this, of course, when you're buying a copy of Mr. Romero's book this evening. You can pick up a copy of this. You can also go online, give us your email address, and we can send you email alerts to everything that we have going on in the store. Again, many of our events, as this one is tonight, is being live streamed through the internet. So if you cannot make an event that you would like to be here for, you can also call the store. We can get a book signed for you and send it to you or hold it here for you at the store at your convenience. Most of these events, as I say, are now live streamed. So we prefer to have you here in the store, but if you can't make it, that's always an option for you. But tonight we are very proud to have with us Luis E. Romero, his book, The Seventh Distinction. By combining ancient wisdom and modern knowledge, Luis E. Romero brings with us a new worldview with astounding power to transform our lives. This worldview helps us reframe reality, reassesses ourselves, and detoxify our relationships as we strive for happiness and success. On the pages of The Seventh Distinction, the author redefines simplicity, evolution, leadership, competency, vision, principle, and consciousness in order to lay down the path to personal mastery, leadership, and peak performance. Regardless of our area of work, the distinctions presented in this book will help us solve problems that were previously elusive and achieve goals that were previously unimaginable. Luis E. Romero is a renowned speaker, coach, and author in the fields of personal mastery, leadership, and peak performance. He has over 12 years of successful experience in the U.S. and Latin America, where he has worked with over 60 organizations and delivered keynote speeches to over 7,000 people. Luis, as an economist, graduated from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and holds additional professional certifications in executive coaching, personality analysis, negotiation, and management consulting. Please give him your warmest Books and Books welcome, Luis E. Romero.
Thank you very much to all of you for coming out this evening. It's been a long ride. I've spent about a year writing this book, about 6 months trying to get it out there, and that was in December of last year. So it took me 1 more year almost to get it on the shelves of Books and Books. So let's have a round of applause for Books and Books. I'd like to thank the Books and Books staff for putting together this event this evening, specifically Joanna Clark, who put up with me for about a month. I'm a control freak, and she was able to deal with me very effectively. Thank you very much. Really, I appreciate it. I'd like to thank Eduardo Quesada, Eduardo Hapke, Pedro Toro, y Diego Texera for supporting my book and supporting my work since I came to Miami about 3 years ago. And last but not least, I'd like to thank my wife, Catherine, for making the impossible possible and for being the rock that keeps me afloat and being the glue that keeps this book together. Round of applause for my wife, please. So I'll get right to down to business. This book is called The Seventh Distinction, The Path to Personal Mastery, Leadership, and Peak Performance. Like every book worth writing, I believe, it was the result of a conflict and the search for the solution to that conflict. Ever since I was a kid, probably since I was about 4 or 5 years old, all the way to high school, I suffered from a very, very mild case of OCD. Those of you who know what that is, obsessive compulsive disorder. Very mild, very manageable. Actually, it didn't really show in my behavior. I didn't know what was happening. I didn't know what to call it. I didn't know how to articulate the experience of having OCD. Couldn't explain it to my parents and couldn't explain it to anybody else. To the positive side of that, it turns out that OCD, to a certain degree of intensity, helps academic performance. So I was doing pretty well in school, and even though I was suffering from this condition, I couldn't see, and nobody could see, the negative consequences of it. When I went to college at MIT, things got a little differently. School got a lot tougher. Circumstances and conditions were a lot more challenging, and the OCD started to ramp up. The symptoms were a little more visible to myself, not so much visible to everybody else. So I tried to compensate for those symptoms by exercising, partying, socializing, and I think I did a pretty good job hiding the, the symptoms of OCD, even though I earned myself the nickname Armageddon in college, and that was all because of one party that went wrong. It's a good thing we didn't have YouTube back then, and that nobody had smartphones and cell phones with cameras. But I could feel the OCD sort of creeping up and modifying my behavior. And after I graduated from college, I went on to, I studied economics, and I went on to take a job as an econometrician, working for an econometrics research firm in Boston, Massachusetts. And then that was for about 18 months. And then I went back to Venezuela, my native country, where I took up a job as a management consultant, working for a consulting firm down there in Venezuela. And around the year 2004, about 2004, the symptoms and the physical manifestations and psychological manifestations of OCD spun out of control. It started to modify my behavior in a visible way for myself and in a visible way for the people around me. So I started to feel that I needed to make decisions. I needed to look for additional resources to be able to manage that condition. First of all, diagnose it properly, because even though I kind of knew I had OCD, I wasn't really sure. And once I found out I had OCD, I needed to find the right kind of help for that condition. And just to give you an idea of how bad that OCD condition got to be around the year 2004, I'm going to show you a slide that kind of illustrates the worldview that I had at that time, the kind of the way or the prism, the lens through which I saw the world and myself in the year 2004. And when you see the world through that slide and you get OCD, hell unleashes badly. And I'll let you know why. OCD, the way OCD works is that it gets into your mental models, into the cracks and into the nook and crannies of your mental models, of your worldview, your opinions, your paradigms, and it introduces self-doubt to a degree that it's unmanageable, and the need to reassess yourself and to reassess everything all the time. So if that is kind of the way you see the world, and you combine that with self-doubt and the need to reassess everything, you can imagine that life becomes progressively a nightmare that's very hard to handle, and it affects everything, your relationships, your performance. For the first time in my life, I saw my professional performance decrease gradually but sustainably over the course of 2 years, and well, I just couldn't handle it anymore. And I decided to reassess myself, but not paradigm by paradigm. I decided to reassess myself fully and once and for all. So I resigned from that position that I had as a management consultant, and spent about 2 or 3 months not even looking for a job, but just sort of taking a different look at life and refreshing experiences, going on vacation, being with my family, etc., etc. And I had the good fortune to meet a guy whose name is Eduardo Martí, by the way. There is 5 very important Eduardos in my life. My name is Luis Eduardo, which is a good coincidence. I met this guy, Eduardo Martí, who's the president of a Venezuelan business, a Venezuelan company dedicated to leadership development and personal growth in Venezuela and Latin America. And this guy, he met me at a meeting And he offered me a job on the spot. And I wasn't looking for a job, but I understood that my savings were going to wear off, and I took up that job. So that was an introduction to a whole different world. Even though I didn't dismiss all of this, because this was very useful for many years, and it helped me get my first jobs and do very well while working at those companies, I was able to reassess and reframe this through a different lens and with a different attitude. I'm going to show you another slide that sort of encompasses the type of new paradigms or the type of new ideas that I was becoming familiar with while working at this new business. So for the first time in my life, I was able to read those quotes. I'm going to move a little bit here to make sure I read them for you. Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks outside awakens. And I realized that I was looking outside for a long time, pretty much my whole life. And that's the way I was brought up, and that was the way I was educated at school. And that's the way I was pretty much reinforced during my college years. And all those other quotes, man plans, God laughs. And that's for a guy who studied system dynamics as a way to predict the future. So it really didn't, it broke my worldview, but allowed me to substitute it with something better. And that last, the one over here from Albert Einstein, we should take care not to make the intellect our God. It has powerful muscle, but it has no personality. So you can imagine the sort of re-engineering that was going on inside my head and inside my heart. And those were very, very traumatic years for me, but then something good started to happen. I was able to experience myself differently. I was able to experience my relationships differently. And I was becoming a little happier and a little less tense, a little more joyful and a little less anxious and a little less stressed out. And for all that matter, up to that point, everything was profit, because when you become less stressed out, life just becomes better. It doesn't really matter how you got there. So this was my introduction to a whole new way of life. Later, I got my hands on a book that changed my life forever. It's called the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tse. It's a book written around 400 or 500 BC by a Chinese guy in China. And he was a contemporary of Confucius. He was a little older than Confucius, but Confucianism and Taoism became the two main philosophies in China during that time, and it's pretty much shaped what China was for the next 2,000 years. And if you read the Tao Te Ching, you realize that it defines China today in sort of a creepy way, but it does. And having been a martial artist for 25 years, for the first time in my life, after reading that book, I was able to get a hold on this. I saw that symbol for 25 years in my dojo. I meditated with that symbol. That was the reference for everything we did at karate lessons. And for the first time, I was able to comprehend the full meaning to my understanding of that symbol. And when I was able to get that understanding, my mind was fully reformed. Like everything that happened before was a progression up until this time. And when I read this book, I was fully reformed in terms of looking at the world based upon an inevitable balance that is always going to include the bad and the good, good and evil, the desired and the undesired, what you want and what you don't want, and everything is going to happen at the same time. And you're going to have to make choices all the time, because you cannot avoid what you don't like. You cannot you can close your eyes and make a choice not to see it, but it's always going to be there. And when you're able to use all that to your advantage, you become freer and you become even more powerful. So from this symbol, I was able to come up with what I call distinctions that make a world of a difference. Distinctions that once established open up a whole new world of meaning and choices that you can use to your favor and to the favor of the people around you. And those distinctions, even though I probably concluded about 20 or 25, 7 of those distinctions make the largest difference of all. And those are the seven distinctions presented in the book, the seventh distinction. And later we will address why the book is called The Seventh Distinction and not The Seven Distinctions. There is a special reason for that. And to illustrate the transformational power of all that previous experience, probably about 15 years of transformation, probably the last 5 were the strongest, more transformational ones. I came up with an exercise to illustrate what I felt and what I experienced. And the exercise is illustrated by this slide. What you guys have on the slide is a progression, is a numerical sequence, right? And a numerical sequence is just a progression of numbers in which the transition from the first number to the second number meets the same pattern as the transition from the second number to the third number, and so on. So I just want to ask you guys, what number do you think comes after the 20?
27.
For those of you who have been with me in the past, I urge you to restrain yourselves and not. So who says 22? Who says 20? I heard 27. Okay. Who says 21? Okay. Any other options? 23. Okay. All right. Think there's more? Okay. So those of you who said 22, why is it 22? Okay. Those of you who say it's 27, why would it be 27? And those of you who said it's 21, why is it 21?
Well, you ended with 20. You started with 2. After 20 is 21. So that's why it's like 1 digit more.
So arbitrarily, the progression starts at 2, ends at 20, and then starts again. It's an option. It's an option. It's an option. Okay. See, I love this exercise because it shows the underlying reality of life. It's like for those of you who watched The Matrix, saw the movie The Matrix. I remember Morpheus, one of the main characters, saying that the Matrix is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth. And when you are circumstantially right, it's worse. Because you're right, but for the wrong reason. And that makes you believe you know what you're doing, and we don't know what we're doing. So, yes, the number is 21. But that's not the reason. And I'm gonna answer that with another question. What number comes after 21? 31. Why? Well, the number that comes after the 21 is 22. And the number that comes after the 22 is 23. And even though I am giving you the answer, it is pretty much impossible for people to see the answer at a first glance. You need to try it and rehearse it and sort of, trial and error up until you get to the right answer. And the key here is to find the pattern, right? If you realize the pattern, then the solution is evident. And I'll tell you the pattern. Every one of those numbers starts with the letter T in English? Right? So 21, 22, 23, 24, up until 29, up to 29. And then 30, and 31, and 32, up to 39. And then 200. There you go. Why does this exercise reveal what I went through? Well, because I found out that our paradigms and our mental models are just the combination of permitted associations and unpermitted associations. Associations that are allowed by culture and associations that are not allowed by culture. Those who are a little smarter dare making other associations, and they're able to see a little more. But at the end of the day, evolution and growth and development is about your ability to make new associations that nobody has ever made before, and probably make associations that society tells you not to make. You were raised not to make certain associations because it makes you a sinner, because it makes you guilty, because it makes you dumb, for whatever reason. But you were taught, you were raised not to make those associations. And many of today's problems at a social level, political level, and economic level is because there are associations that we are not making. And we are forcing associations that shouldn't be made. And at the end of the day, that's what a worldview is, what a mental model is, associations that you're able to make. I was able, through this process, to reassociate, to associate things that I had never associated and to disconnect things that should have never been connected. And that was my personal process. I'm not saying it's a universal process. It was just my personal process. It was very effective for me. And it turns out that these connections are the 7 distinctions presented in the book. So what we're going to do now is that we're going to go through each one of the 7 distinctions, and I'm going to explain briefly what they mean. I'm going to share maybe 1 or 2 quotes from each chapter, because every association is developed and explored in one chapter. And then we're going to get to the conclusions. So the first association is the difference between complication and complexity. And this association is very simple. Complication, I have found, is the result of our actions. And complexity is the nature of things. Things are complex by design. Wherever you have multiple variables interconnected engendering change, that is complexity. That is the way human beings chose to define complexity. Now, that doesn't mean it is complicated. It is complicated if you don't know how to do it. And if you approach it and you address it the wrong way, you are going to complicate things. And if you address it the right way, you're going to simplify things. But they are still complex. Tying your shoelace is a very complex process. Your brain goes through so many different synapses and so simple for almost everyone. Yet, when someone has a certain type of brain damage, you can see that what's simple for you, it's hell for another person because they cannot do it. It's too complicated for them. So it's about the subject. It's not about the situation. It's about the person who experiences the situation. There is a quote here from Walt Whitman that I'd like to share with you. I'm going to ask you to read it because I cannot read it from here, but it says something about simplicity being the glory of expression. Nothing is better than simplicity. That's from Leaves of Grass by Walt Whitman. And I believe this quote, I start every chapter of the book with a quote by someone else that I sort of think embodies the core, the essence of that chapter. So I'm going to share with you now 2 quotes from this chapter. This is a book presentation, and I'm going to talk about the book. So I'm going to share with you 2 short quotes from this chapter. The first one. Complications are not negative by definition. Complications, although undesirable, are not negative by definition. They are the messengers that warn us about our misdoings. If we address complications with the right disposition, they will provide us with the necessary information to reframe the situation at hand and change our course of action. So, in a way, once you screwed up, the best possible result is a complication. Because if the complication doesn't happen, you will never find out you screwed up. So complications are a blessing if you know how to deal with them. Second quote from this chapter: leverage in solving leverage the rise of simplicity. In the same way a lever helps us move a heavy object, leverage helps us solve a heavy problem. From a systemic point of view, leverage is the ability of just a few variables to produce a widespread impact within a system of many variables. Such few variables are called leverage factors, and they become visible by applying systems thinking to understand a complex situation. I have found in my personal life and professional experience that when I'm able to apply this successfully, the result is always simplicity. Always. And if I do it wrong, the result is always complications. So I guess it's about understanding the complexity of the system that you're working with. We move on to the second distinction. Understanding versus learning. The rise of evolution. In the English dictionary, and I believe in pretty much every language, in Spanish, in Portuguese, and even in French, these two words are direct synonyms. You say that you understood something or that you learned something, and it's pretty much the same from a colloquial point of view. But from a psychological and behavioral point of view, are two completely different phenomena. Understanding something means that you finally agree or disagree with an idea, and you're able to provide evidence. And understanding enters your mind, only your mind. Now, learning is something completely different. Learning is changing behavior. Has nothing to do with understanding. Might be considered an extension of understanding, but you can spend a life of understanding and no learning. You can spend a life of studying and understanding new things and getting new knowledge, which is the result of understanding, but you don't change your behavior, therefore you don't change who you are. Now, I believe we are not talking about understanding being bad and learning being good, not at all. What I'm saying is that we need to transcend our hunger for knowledge and understand that if that knowledge does not affect our behavior, that knowledge is useless, especially if we are behaving badly, and that knowledge doesn't prompt us to change. And the quote that I chose to begin this chapter with is from George Santayana. I'm going to move a little bit to read it. The tide of evolution carries everything with it, people no less than bodies, and something no less than something. So pretty much evolution carries everything with it. Evolution changes everything when it happens. If it doesn't happen, it doesn't change anything. And I'm going to share with you now a quote from this chapter that sort of describes a little bit one of the main dilemmas and misdoings of modern society, and sort of food for thought and an invitation to reflect. So, progress. Only half of the picture. Progress has no moral compass. Its only purpose is to make processes and devices more powerful without regard to ultimate consequences. Progress is as capable to end world hunger as it is to cause human extinction. Progress has exactly the same power to end world hunger as it has to cause human extinction. Progress allows us to master our environment, but it does not help us to master ourselves. And that's where I introduce the concept of evolution. When you evolve, you have mastered yourself. And if you evolve and you take a handle on progress, if you steer progress in the direction of evolution, then we're doing things right. But if we don't evolve as people, if we don't master ourselves, progress is going to steer us in whatever direction, and we don't know where we're going. And that is why we have been on the verge of nuclear annihilation at least twice, World War II and the Cuban Missile Crisis. And that's only what we know from public news and publicly shared history, because that risk has been also very tangible and palpable for many nations like Russia and China or Japan, where accidents cause disasters that whose consequences are going to be paid for over the next 100, 200, 300 years. Third distinction, the difference between management and influence, the rise of leadership. This is a little more down to earth, a little more day-to-day concerns for most of us who have companies and who do business and who have people to supervise and who have supervisors, and we're trying to make a living and to make a profit in today's economy. This is a very practical consideration, a very practical distinction. Yet, I have to say that for the last almost 30-something years, the debate about leadership has been misled by one article that was published in 1977. And for some reason, that article had an impact in the corporate world that it shaped the conversation for 30 years. And that article is published by the Harvard Business Review and written by Professor Zelensky, which, by the way, it was a great contribution. And at the time, it triggered the debate. The problem is that we all got stuck with that paradigm and never changed it. So the article is titled, Managers and Leaders, Are They Different? And the whole point of this article is saying that leaders are one thing and managers are another thing. That leaders cannot be managers and that managers cannot be leaders. And it goes on to say that when someone develops his or her leadership skills to a high degree, at the very same time, he or she is crippling her own management skills. And vice versa. When someone becomes a really, really good manager, in a way, is hampering his or her leadership skills. And that contradicts everything I have seen in my life. That contradicts every single client of mine. That contradicts every single colleague I have ever met. That contradicts every business I have been a consultant for. And what I know for sure is that every good leader I have ever met is the hell of a manager. Every single leader who knows how to move people, how to motivate people, how to generate commitment, how to move the people's will to do better work, is always one of the foremost experts on the business. And every time I meet someone who tries to be a leader only by speaking beautiful words and by being all mushy and, all motivational and inspirational speaker in meetings, but doesn't know the business, is always a bad leader. So that's what I have seen. I had to write about it because I think it makes a positive contribution to the debate. And here I like to use a quote by the father of modern management theory, one of my heroes in this subject is Peter Drucker. The foundation of effective leadership is thinking through the organization's mission, defining and establishing it clearly and visibly. The leader sets the goals, sets the priorities, and sets and maintains the standards. That sounds like a really good manager who's also a good leader. And the main confusion comes, I believe, from people mistaking influence for leadership. Your ability to influence somebody doesn't make you a leader to that person. Your ability to influence someone by a good word, by a good message, by making them feel good when they are feeling down, that ability doesn't make you a good leader. Because to be a good leader, you need to be able to work with that person and solve real-life problems that pertain to the both of you. And you need to utilize technical knowledge about the topic that you guys are working on. And that requires you to be a good manager too. I'm going to share with you, I'm going to jump over this one, and I want to get to the long one, because this is a fragment from the book that I talk about, Jack Welch, which is also one of the foremost leadership gurus in the world, and who has been one of the greatest managers in the world. So if one of the leadership gurus of today's of today is also a good manager, I believe we should pay attention to that person. So I'm going to read this fragment. In his best-selling book, Jack Straight from the Gut, Jack Welch describes his own leadership experience at GE's former CEO, I'm missing the CEO in the quote, by combining principles of influence and management in a dynamic continuum that seems indivisible. He highlighted the importance of helping employees conquer self-confidence and making sure top performers learn from their mistakes. This is definitely a reference to the importance of positive influence. Yet, he also emphasized how critical it was for GE to move from low-margin, low-growth industries to high-margin, high-growth ones in order to achieve sustained growth. Further, he also made a special reference to how important it was for GE to move into businesses with competitive advantages instead of comparative advantages in order to reduce volatility. These are clear references to the significance of good management. Someone who's not a good manager has no idea what Jack Welch is saying. If you don't know about Porter's 5 forces, if you don't know the difference between a competitive advantage and a comparative advantage, if you don't know what a low margin industry is, you're going to bring your company to bankruptcy in a month. So you have to be a good manager to be a good leader, in my opinion. And, well, this is just about the same, in my opinion, without explicitly stating so. Welch believes that in order to be a good leader, the individual also has to be a good manager. Otherwise, Welch would not make references to sound management principles when talking about leadership. So I believe that point is pretty clear in terms of what my opinion is in that regard. We move to distinction number 4, the difference between talent and personality. What's talent? What you can do. What's personality? Who you are. If you focus too much on talent, you're going to forget who you are and who you want to be. So who's going to be in charge of that talent? If you forget who you are and who you want to be. And there is a frenzy. There is an obsession in today's organizations, especially HR people. They have a fixation on looking for the most talented people. It's a matter of pride. It's even a religion. And for some reason, many of these companies happen to be hiring these guys who are unbearable, who are troublemakers, distrustful, greedy, conflictive, insecure, very much egotistical and egocentric, even though they are very talented. But when you mix talent with an egocentric personality, you hire the devil, man. And you're going to have to deal with that person until you fire him. And then you realize that person plays the politics of the organization very well. So then it becomes impossible to fire that person. What's the bottom line here? You need to hire for talent and for personality as well. It's easier to teach someone how to do a job than to teach someone to be a different person. That job is already done. That ship has sailed. You hire a 30-year-old person, if he screwed up, you're not going to change that. Now, if he doesn't know the craft, you can teach him the craft. So I believe that distinction is pretty clear. This is the same distinction that I opened up with by Albert Einstein. Talent is, of course, very powerful, but it has a lot of muscle, but it has no personality. And we are going to, how are we doing on time? We're doing good? Great. So just one quote from this chapter. Competencies, which make us competent and competitive at what we do, result from channeling our talents through the amplifying and targeting effects of our personality. Talents alone lack the launching platform of personality, and therefore can remain unused, misused, or unimproved for years. That's what I have found over my years as a coach and as a consultant. Now we move to distinction number 5. Okay. Ambition versus mission, the rise of vision. What's an ambition is the quest of something for the sake of personal benefit. What's a mission is the quest of something for the sake of collective benefit. So ambitions and missions are two completely different paths. But within the world and within the realm of missions, we have also two different paths. We have selfless missions, and we have self-including missions. Selfless missions are missions like that of Jesus Christ, or maybe even Nelson Mandela, or people of that caliber. Okay? Self-including missions are those followed by anyone who's not a hero, by anyone who wants to help, but doesn't want to be left behind either. I mean, there is nothing more enthusiastic and motivating than a collective project that includes yourself, right? That's in the world of normal people. If you want to be a hero, be my guest. But I'm not going to follow you for one reason. I'm not that special. And most people are not that special. So when we have collective missions that include everyone, including the first missionary, so to speak, those tend to gain a lot more traction. And now, how does the word vision result from this distinction? And this distinction works a little differently from the others. In all the other distinctions, the third term is sort of the result of combining the first two terms. Now, in this case, it's different. In this case, a vision, if properly developed, can help you turn an ambition into a mission. And here's the word. Here's the way I interpret the word vision. Usually, the word. Well, actually, I'm going to go to the quote from this chapter because that sort of summarizes my paradigm about this word. Here I have the quote from Carl Gustav Jung. Your vision will become a lot clearer when you're able to look inside your heart. Those who look outside dream. Those who look inside awaken. So here's the quote from this chapter. A vision for the future is usually considered one of the key aspects of leadership. What we need to realize, though, is that if we do not change our past, we cannot change our future. By reframing the past, we also reframe ourselves in the present. As a result, we become able to reframe the future in ways that were previously unimaginable. And to me, it is just basic logic. Whatever you're able to imagine today, it doesn't matter if you get high, if you get drunk, it doesn't matter if you let yourself go crazy. Whatever you're able to imagine today will be differently if you change yourself into another person. Because it'll be another person imagining the future. If you're able to transform yourself into a different person, then the world or the vision you can have for the future will be different. And this distinction makes a difference only if the future you're imagining is not the best future for you. This distinction makes sense if the future you're imagining for other people is not a good deal for those people. And it doesn't matter how crazy you let yourself go. Actually, the crazier you let yourself go, the more screwed everyone is going to be. So if you want to change what you're able to imagine, you need to change yourself today. And the only way to change yourself today is by reframing your own past, because you are the product of your past. And that is the reason we have therapy, man. That is the reason we have therapeutic processes. Because if we want to change who we are today, we need to go back in history and reframe our own memories, reframe our own experiences. And when we do that successfully, then we're able to imagine something different. So you need to change your past to be able to change the future. And by the way, this is the etymological origin of this word. The word vision comes from the Latin word visio, which means the ability to see everything. And everything is not in the future. Everything is the sum of the past, the present, and the future. So that's sort of the core idea of this chapter. We go to distinction number 6, the difference between obligation and conviction, the rise of principle. Very simple. An obligation is something that you do to meet someone else's expectations. A conviction is something that you do to meet your own expectations. But since we are a social species with individuals, we need to have both. We are a social species with individuals with individual interests. We cannot forget about the other people, but we cannot forget about ourselves. And that's a catch-22. What do? Well, principles are the solution. Principles are universal prescriptions for behavior. And why are they universal prescriptions for behavior? Because they are good for you, and they are good for everybody else. So it is a perfect combination of convictions and obligations. It meets your expectations, and it meets their expectations. So that's why principles are rock solid. They are good for everyone. And here I share a quote by Immanuel Kant: act as if the maxim of thy action were to become by thy will a universal law of nature. And the only way that's possible it's if that's good for you and for everyone else. And I'm going to share with you a quote that actually comes in very handy today, because the news were a little scary, and I just happened to have chosen a quote from the book that fits very well today. So I'm going to read it from my notes. Okay, principles are beyond conservatives and liberals. And I swear to God, this was already finished. This presentation was finished before today. So on the one hand, moralistic, religious, and conservative people tend to build their lives upon obligations. On the other hand, libertarians and liberals tend to build their lives upon convictions. Both types of people, especially when they are extremists, present their personal preferences as principles of universal applicability. Interestingly enough, both types of people compensate for their public tendencies by consenting to the opposite in their private lives. Extreme conservatives tend to indulge personal convictions behind people's backs, and extreme liberals tend to feel obligated to their fellow liberals to defend their convictions. This introduces a fundamental challenge for the people of principle, since, unfortunately, they tend to seem conservative to liberals and liberal to conservatives. This is because from each extreme, the wise, balanced center is usually perceived as the opposite extreme. And I believe this is an X-ray of what's going on today in the US with the whole government shutdown and the whole political dynamics. These two sides are having the hardest time to meet anywhere, not even in the middle, to meet anywhere. And when I read this quote, I'm able to see why, and I'm able to see why similar dynamics, not as extreme and not with the same type of global impact that the U.S. government has, but I'm able to see the same type of dynamics in families, businesses, neighborhoods. People have a hard time meeting in the middle because even though you may be listening to Jesus Christ, and to you, he's going to seem like coming off from the opposite extreme. And finally, the seventh and last distinction of the book. Why is the book titled The Seventh Distinction? Because in my opinion, this distinction is the cradle, is the fundamental rock that triggers all the other distinctions. And once you establish this distinction and are able to integrate it into a balanced sort of experience, you're able to integrate all the other distinctions in the book. So what's the ego? The ego is the apparent self that you present to others. Your ego is designed to meet other people's expectations. So in a way, you design your ego based upon the input that others give you. And that is, since you are in your mother's womb, you already start defining yourself in terms of having your mother like you, and from then on, the same thing for the rest of your life. What's the self? Well, the self is anything but the ego. Is that sense of identity and purpose that is different from the ego. Is that sense of identity and purpose that tells you that you are something different from your ego. And it is really hard to listen the voice of the self, and most of us have a hard time paying attention to it. But I have found in my personal and professional experience that if you want to go down the road of mental health and balanced relationships, you need to listen to yourself. And you need to quiet down your ego, and you need to make your ego work for you rather than work for your ego. And here is an important distinction that I make in this book. The ego is not bad. The ego is not your enemy. In fact, the ego is inevitable. You need to have an ego. If you have opinions, if you have a worldview, if you have judgments, if you think something about something else, then you have an ego. It is impossible not to have an ego. Now, letting your ego dictate who you are, that's a problem. And letting your ego deny real world evidence against its own sentences, that is a problem. You need to have a flexible ego that takes in new input from reality and is able to change over time. And in that sense, that ego works for you. You don't work for your ego. And when you're able to identify that dynamic, when you're aware of that, you start to develop consciousness. You start to become conscious. And the quote that I used to illustrate the meaning of this chapter is probably the most powerful phrase I have ever read or heard or listened to in my whole life. Is the famous phrase by Jesus Christ, the truth shall set you free. Now the question is, what truth are we talking about? And to me, the truth is not the existence of a super God that's going to punish me or reward me if I do well. That truth, to me, if it's actual truth for the moment, is irrelevant. The truth that sets me free is being able that my ego is trying to control me. And if I become aware of that and I fight back and I control my ego, that truth sets me free. Free from what? From the slavery of the ego. I'm going to share with you now a couple of quotes from this chapter, and then we're going to be having some drinks and sandwiches. So people, the mirrors of truth. It is impossible to become conscious in a world of one. You need other people telling you that you're wrong, or you need other people sucking up to you to screw you up. But it's always someone else who triggers the question, am I Superman or not? Am I super me or not? Who's right? That person or me? That questioning, that self-reflection, That's the source of consciousness. And you always need someone else to guide you or at least to trigger that process. So I'm going to read this quote. People, the mirrors of truth. Whether we feel angry or sad, enlightened or confused, our interactions with other people will evoke that truth. Maybe we can hide it from them, but we can never hide it from ourselves. When we finally acknowledge and embrace our inner truth, we finally become conscious. Second quote from this book, we have only three more. Something that's critical, at least has been instrumental in my personal growth process. When I was able to get a handle of this, my life changed. I'm not saying I have achieved it. I'm just saying that it is a useful reference. Humility, the antidote to conceit and shame. Humility allows us to experience our achievements devoid of conceit. This is crucial. And our failures devoid of shame. Because shame is also the work of the ego. It is your ego that makes you feel embarrassed. It's not the other people. It's not the people that are looking at you. It is your ego telling you, you screwed up, you're worthless, even if everybody else is quiet. So your ego makes you feel shameful. And if you are humble, truly humble, you will never feel superior. But if you're truly humble, you will never feel inferior. It is impossible because your ego is on check. So I continue here. Okay. This way, our achievements and our failures can help us learn more about ourselves and those around us. This is why humility is considered the highest of virtues. This has been key for me. And then, this is sort of rephrasing what I just said about the phrase by Jesus, only this is a lot more clear. This is a lot clearer than the way I expressed it before. The truth shall set you free, said Jesus of Nazareth. This is probably the greatest phrase ever spoken. I now read it as, through humility, my inner self will set me free. Free from what? Free from my ego. He also said, love thy neighbor as yourself. I now read that as, only my neighbor, meaning anybody else, can set me free by showing me my inner self. We said before that when you interact with other people, your inner truth is evoked. You can hide it from them, but you cannot hide it from yourself. So, only my neighbor can set me free by showing me my inner self. How can I not love the one who sets me free? Such an act of liberation can only inspire love in return. So, in my view, everyone is deserving of your love because it is them who tell you who you are by showing you your inner self. You might hide it from them, but once they showed it to you, the job is done. You're going to take that home. And you're going to have to talk to yourself and figure that out. And the final quote. It is of paramount importance to understand that our Western culture is built largely upon the paradigm of Darwinian competition, which emphasizes and exalts egos. Therefore, developing humility is nothing short of an epic challenge. It is also important not to be judgmental of others as we develop our humility. Our resolution to develop humility does not obligate others to do so. Humility is the way of pioneers who have the courage to be true to themselves and to see others as opportunities instead of threats. And the final question is, what kind of a person do you want to be? And in my experience, personal experience, the answer to this question, and the way I try to answer this question every day to myself, is by taking a look at these 7 distinctions and trying to integrate them and balance them out and trying to find a third sort of space of meaning and tools that I can use to master myself, to help others master themselves, which is leadership, and by so doing, improving performance. And thank you very much for being here.
Folks, thank you so much for being here. We have Luis's book for sale. It's behind the counter. If you would be so kind, when you rise, fold your chairs. There's some great snacks over there provided for you by Mr. Romero. He will sign the book, and he'll answer any questions for you while he can. Thank you so much for coming.